It's been a while since we've delved into some ghost stories. So today we have a selection of first responder ghost stories that are real stories from real police, firemen, paramedics, 911 operators, and other first responders. Let's go.
Well, this is not my story. I know the area well, and I know the man who told me this story even better. We work in a big county with one of the top school districts in the state, and a new nuclear plant that provides many of the residents with employment. Most of the acreage is farm, but it is starting to have some heavily residential areas as well. It has also made our once primarily farming county into a more populated and semi-rural area. New neighborhoods have popped up all over the place. One old stretch of road had a row of new construction on one side, complete with streetlights and manicured lawns. On the opposite side of the road were nothing but fields of corn and woods. The streetlights tended to be closer to the houses than the road. That is to say, the road itself was pretty darkened, but their glow could sometimes play tricks on our eyes. A few years ago, one of the traffic guys in my agency was working the night shift, and this car drove by him as he was parked in the empty gravel lot at the beginning of the new constructions. It had been where they used to park the heavy equipment when they were done for the day, as they were working on building the neighborhood. The swerving car was an old beat-up four-door Buick that did a hard swerve off the road and back on it again before evidently noticing the police cruiser and then sped off. The officer who witnessed the incident called it in as a possible DUI suspect and then proceeded to begin pursuit. As soon as that old Buick saw that he was being followed, it took off. At the time, the officer had not yet flipped on his lights or his sirens. It was early in the morning. Most of the neighborhood was still asleep. In an attempt to be respectful of the otherwise empty and quiet area, it was about 3 a.m. The officer chose not to draw attention to the chase and continued to pursue the suspected drunk driver in silence. At this point, the suspect was approximately 300 to 400 yards ahead of the officer. Both vehicles were traveling at about 80 miles an hour. The officer had remained in contact with dispatch for the entirety of the situation. Not only is this standard procedure, but the officer was particularly concerned about the dangers of driving at such reckless speeds in the dark. If a deer, raccoon, or possum, or any other animal ran out in front of either of them, at these increasing speeds, one or both of them could lose control of their vehicles and crash, causing more damage and harm than was necessary. Without warning, the sedan slammed on their brakes, swerved hard onto the shoulder, and then back onto the road again before speeding off once again, as if they were suddenly startled by something. The chase lasted another 3 minutes, as they were forced further and further into the more rural area of the county. No doubt the sedan thought he could escape into the maze of gravel roads that cut all throughout the county. However, hitting a gravel road well over the posted recommendation is a surefire way to lose control of your vehicle, and that is exactly what happened. The sedan hit the gravel going about 65, lost control, fishtailing as he slammed on his brakes, and went nose first into a shallow ditch. The driver was not hurt, and aside from the bumper he was missing, neither was his car. Or that was the prevailing opinion anyway, as the car looked like it had been refurbished from scrapyard before it wound up in the ditch. It was quite the miracle that the officer and the driver had come to the end of the pursuit with no harm done. By then, more officers had arrived on the scene, along with a tow truck to get the suspect's car out of the ditch. "Where's my bumper?" he shouted over and over. "I had one when I left the bar. Where did it go?" His whole car was beat to hell. In hindsight, the fact this thing had a bumper at all was shocking. To see the man so upset over losing it was even more so. Nonetheless, it fell to the agency to find the lost bumper. It was not at the scene where the man had lost control of his car. As the morning sun rose, the search became easier, but still no bumper had been found. The officer did not recall if the car had had a bumper when he began pursuit or not, despite the adamancy of the suspect. At this point, the suspect was in the local jail to sober up. He was being charged with DUI naturally, but he needed to be sober before any more information was taken from him or given to him. The officer who had run the pursuit had made the official arrest was off duty, but he assured everyone he would find that bumper. The next evening, the officer came in an hour before his shift was supposed to start, with the intent of reviewing his dashcam footage. At the very least, he could verify if the beat-up car in question had a bumper or not. "What do you think? Bumper or no bumper?" he asked me as I sat next to him. My job is to handle all the tech stuff in the office. "My bet is on no bumper. That car was so beat up, it's a wonder it didn't fall apart as soon as it got over 40 miles an hour, I had said. "Then my bet is on it had a bumper, which means if it does, you owe me a coffee and a donut, and not from the break room." He was ready to start the video. "Fine, but if I win, then you owe me lunch from the burger joint up the road. You guys keep me so busy I never have time to run up there on my break." I was the only tech guy at the time. "You got a deal." He hit the play button, and together we watched what started out as an empty road. A utility truck drove by, followed by a tractor with its lights on. I fast-forwarded through another 30 minutes of video before we saw the sedan in question come into frame. Shortly after coming into frame, it could be seen swerving on and off the road. "Dispatch, this is Officer. I've got a possible DUI, and I'm starting pursuit. No lights or sirens." "Officer, this is dispatch. Received. Proceed with caution. Keep in contact." "Roger." On the dashcam, the image could not have been clearer, but the bumper was there. It was barely there as it was held on by duct tape that had begun to peel and was now flapping against the now missing bumper. "I'll take my coffee with a shot of espresso and some sugar. A simple glazed donut will do." The officer sat back, crossed his arms, and smiled smugly. "There it is. Sure. But where did it go?" Curiosity and the promise to find the bumper brought our attention back to the screen and knocked the smug grin right off the officer's face. The officer stayed well back from the sedan throughout the pursuit. This gave a wide field of vision. The road, the faint glow of the streetlights to the left, and the complete darkness to the right of the road were all visible. The video continued for another minute and a half before we saw the sedan's bumper fall to the road and tumble erratically to a stop. Something moved across the screen in the blink of an eye and was gone. Both cars sped past the point where the bumper should be. "Did you see that?" I asked. "Did you see it too? What did we see? Can you back it up? Maybe slow it down?" It became apparent the officer was shaken. The bumper was there in the middle of the road, and then it wasn't. And yet, at the time, he had seen nothing, and more importantly, he had hit nothing. "What about last night? Did you not see that happen?" I was already backing up the video and setting the functions in place to watch it in slow motion. He said nothing, but in my peripheral, I could see him shaking his head. In slow motion, we watched again. The duct tape gave, the bumper dropped to the pavement, and it bounced and rolled 1, 2, 3 times before teetering to a stop. It had barely stopped rocking when a dark figure ran from the glow of the streetlights across the road, grabbed the bumper, and ran into the fields, never pausing, not faltering. "Again," he spoke. For 30 minutes, we watched and rewatched the slow motion. It did not seem humanly possible for someone to run so quickly, so sure-footedly across a dark road, grabbing an awkward long object from the ground and carry on into a ditch. An animal could have run fast enough, maybe, but it was not grabbing a bumper up out of the way. Best case scenario, the animal could have knocked it off the road, but the bumper had clearly been picked up and moved. They wore nothing that would give their size or shape away. No reflective clothing, no flashlight, headlamp, nothing that any of the typical joggers and dog walkers normally wore if they were out at that hour. Two things were blatantly obvious. The officer would have hit the bumper and most likely have lost control of his cruiser, and we had no idea what or who could have moved at the speeds required with such agility in the dark in order to remove said bumper from the road. All bets forgotten, the officer scooted back in his chair, stood, and said, "I'm going back to check on the scene. Look for some footprints and see if that bumper is still there." I nodded and went back to the dashcam video. Maybe with some finagling, I could get it clearer and figure out what this dark figure actually was. Later, after his shift was over and we were crossing paths, I asked if he had found anything. The bumper, footprints, anything. Found the bumper. I sent it to the impound with a new roll of duct tape. But that's all? Nothing else? He knew what I was asking, but at this point we both felt a little crazy. There was something on that video, a video that clearly showed a bumper being held in place with duct tape, and yet a figure had potentially saved his life by removing debris from this old clunker, and there was no clue as to what it was. No footprints, no hoof prints, tracks, nothing. He shook his head and rubbed his forehead. The bumper was just lying in the ditch. It was filthy and beat to hell, but there were no handprints, smudges, or anything to even remotely suggest it had been picked up by a person. He shook his head again and dragged a hand down his face as he walked away. I never heard anyone else talk about this night. I imagine the officer didn't want a lot of attention drawn to the mysterious dark figure in the video. To be honest, we never talked about it either. It did not matter what I did to the video. The figure remained dark, formless, and unidentifiable. I never got answers for myself or for the officer as to what it could have been, or who it could have been. Of course, it could just be chalked up to one of those witching hour moments, or dumb luck. Being a serving police officer, I'm usually quite skeptical when it comes to far-fetched stories. After a while on the job, it begins to feel like you've seen it all. And there's always an evidence-based explanation, no matter how crazy the scene or story is. There is always a logical course of events. I am not of a mind to question everything and keep digging until the answers come to light. To follow the evidence and use doubt to drive my digging. But as this particular experience has happened to me personally twice, I can't discount it as my imagination or being overtired. I can't shield my doubt behind my skepticism because there is no doubt and no experience. The evidence, it all comes back to me. I work at a heritage site. It is one of the oldest functional buildings still in use today. History has been made in this place. Several industrials have worked in these halls. Many people have been condemned and even died within these walls. Some believe the ghosts of the past still haunt the building. I'll admit, I doubt this. Or rather, I did doubt this, even though there was always a part of me that felt that I should believe it. While the original part of the building was built a long time ago, certain parts have been added to the structure over the years. One such addition is a front corridor. Still, while it is new, comparatively speaking, it was built in 1840, only about 10 meters away from the oldest part of the building, the hall. Anytime I can, on duty, I actively try to avoid the corridor as best as I can. Walking down the heavily wood-paneled corridor, the walls seem to fall in around you, getting closer and tighter the further you go down. To me, it always feels as though someone is watching and waiting for just the right moment to jump up and get me. Saying that out loud makes me feel foolish, given the pride I have in my uncertainty. But it is what it is, and it is the first area of the whole building I felt a heavy presence. The hall, being the oldest part of the building, has seen the likes of Charles I and William Wallace Braveheart stand trial before execution, along with many others. The history of violence within its walls can be felt, especially when open to the possibilities there could linger the ghosts of the past. Again, there was a time when I doubted this, but I can no longer attempt to discredit myself or the stories of others. An overactive imagination, lack of sleep, paranoia, or whatever other reason could be given. I was the one with it. But then it happened. A moment that changed my mind proved that history could survive, and erased my doubt and cynical belief, at least when it came to the building. It happened after another long shift, with another one beginning in only 7 hours. If I had taken the time to get home, cleaned up, in bed, and back up, and to work for the next shift, I would have only gotten about 4 hours of sleep at best. It had been a long week, and that was just not going to cut it. The structure has a basement room with folding beds for service officers on occasions like this. It is certainly nothing fancy, but it satisfies the purpose it is designed to fulfill. A place for overtired officers to catch a few extra hours of sleep before another grueling shift. I had not utilized this area before this night. Of course, I had heard stories. The other officers who had used the room would tell stories and what I assumed to be tall tales. Most of the time, it would be officers who had been on the job for years, telling the rookies to be careful down there, sleep with the door open, and all that nonsense. I had been given all the same warnings. Veteran officers had told me their stories, and I had listened with a skeptic's ear. I was not going to be scared of the monster under the bed. I grabbed the overnight bag I kept packed in my personal car, in case this ever happened, and headed back into the building. I was exhausted and ready to crash. I made my way down to the basement level, followed the minimal signage directing me to the makeshift sleeping quarters, and found an empty bed. The rooms are cool, as I expected they would be since they are in a basement. The bed was narrow, a single pillow lay at the head, and an extra fleece blanket lay folded at the foot. It was evident the term folding bed was just a polite way of saying large cot, but still, it would do the job. I set my bag on the bed and opened it up to pull out the hygiene bag with my spare toothbrush, toothpaste, and razor. A quick trip to the bathroom, and I was back in the room stripping down and changing into the flannel pants and white t-shirt I had in the bag. After settling down for the night, I shut the door and turned off the lights. I expected the bed to feel flimsy and to squeak under the weight of my body, but I was worried for nothing. For being a little more than a cot, the bed was surprisingly comfortable and quiet. It did not take long for my exhausted body to drift off to sleep. I recall waking up sometime later and feeling a presence in the room with me. At first, I thought nothing of it. I had been dead asleep and tried to explain the feeling as just being unnerved by not being home. A couple of the others had tried to spook me earlier in the day, and I figured I must have dreamt of something that spooked me awake. And then suddenly, in the midst of my rational thinking, I felt this heavy, oppressive presence pressing down on my chest, forcing me into the mattress. It was like nothing I felt before. I'd fallen and had the wind knocked out of me. I'd been on the bottom of the dog pile. I'd been tackled to the ground by someone twice my size. None of that compared to the pressure I felt forcing me into the mattress. It felt as though I was paralyzed. The force of the presence seemed to permeate into my every fiber, filling me with the weight of its oppression. Fear had seeped into my mind, and I fought not to panic. I just needed to get up and walk around, to leave the room, to get some water, but I couldn't. My arms, my legs, every part of my body was out of my control. Terror ripped through me as I realized I had no physical control over my own body. I was being pushed deeper into the thin mattress. The springs began to creak as they pressed even further into themselves. It felt like minutes would turn into hours as I lay there in a panic, unable to move, barely able to breathe. In reality, I believe this went on for about 30 seconds before I regained the ability to control my body again. I had never stopped trying to fight against the presence. When it finally lifted, my arms and legs jerked up from the confines of the mattress. I sucked in a gulp of air and shot out of the bed. I immediately put the lights on and opened the door. I went out to wash my face in the bathroom. I tried my best to chalk this up to a nightmare. I went back to my bed, leaving the lights on and the door open, and spent the rest of the night drifting in and out of sleep. When my alarm went off, the whole night seemed surreal. I couldn't and I wouldn't believe this had happened. I told myself it was just my overactive imagination and the power of suggestion. Nothing more. I got ready for my shift and went on about my job. Over the next few days, I mentioned my night in the basement to a few colleagues at work who had also used the room. That room was creepy. I kept the door open all night, one guy said to a few of us as he stood in a line grabbing food to go. "Did you feel it?" I can't believe I'm even asking this. Did you feel a presence down there? I asked him when no one gave him a hard time for the fear he admitted to having of the room. Yes, it was the weirdest feeling, like I was being watched, and like I was not wanted there. He visibly shook off the memory. Was that all? Just the feeling? I wanted to know if anyone else had had the same experience as I did, with physical contact. Not just a feeling, just the feeling. It really creeped me out. Another guy spoke up after this officer answered me. I got the feeling. It was intense. The moment I walked in the room, it felt oppressive. I hate staying down there. I only stay if the lights are on and the door is wide open. He shook his head and ran his hand down his face. He was not proud of this. He was a big man, towering over most of us, and built like a gladiator. To be scared of ghosts or a presence seemed childish and immature, but he was not alone, and no one was laughing. An uncomfortable silence filled the space between us. Finally, one of the most veteran of us said he heard why or who the presence could be. They say one of the contractors who worked on the building hung himself in one of the basement rooms. They didn't find his body until 3 days after he had died. He shrugged his shoulders, grabbed his food, and left. The rest of us continued to compare experiences. I eventually told them what had happened to me. I was unnerved at the fact that they believed me. The influence of the presence had obviously affected each and every one of the police officers I had served with in this unit. I'll let you all know what I find out, I assured each of them when I said I was curious if the old veteran officer was right about the hanging. Further research was wanted by all. Unfortunately, I have been unable to confirm if this was the same room the hanging happened. As far as the hanging, the whole building, the grounds, all of it is married to a history of violence. Who can really say for sure if it was the contractor who hung himself, or some other poor lost soul who suffered inside the near ancient walls? A few weeks later, I had a reason to sleep over once again. Another long week full of long shifts, and one more to go with a short window for sleep in between. I was more reluctant to stay in this time, but I did not let fear conquer me or my better senses. I was prepared for the worst, but hoped nothing would happen. However, when the presence came upon me again, pressing me into the bed once more, I reacted much differently. I was able to maintain my sense of calm and composure. Despite being pressed into the mattress, I managed to say, "I know you are here. I do not want to harm you. I just want to rest before work." Slowly, the presence began to lift off me, freeing my limbs and releasing me of its oppressive weight. Since that second night, when I spoke directly to the presence, I haven't been bothered. I am still wary when sleeping there, but I've started sleeping with the lights off. I still leave the door open though,